Imagine stepping into a cave on a remote Indonesian island and finding bones that look human, yet belong to someone barely over 3 feet tall, with a brain no bigger than a grapefruit. At first, you might think they belong to a child. But then you realize these weren't children at all. They were adults, entire communities of them. And somehow, these tiny humans managed to survive in a world ruled by towering predators, volcanic eruptions, and even giant relatives of their own. So who were they? And how did a species so small manage to stand tall against the giants of prehistory? In 2003, on the remote Indonesian island of Flores, a team of archaeologists ventured deep into a limestone chamber known as Liang Bua cave. At first glance, the site looked like countless others in Southeast Asia, dark, damp, filled with layers of ancient sediment. But as the team carefully brushed away dirt and bone fragments, they realized they were standing on the edge of something extraordinary. What they uncovered was a nearly complete skeleton of a tiny adult female, later nicknamed Flo. She stood barely 3 feet 6 inches tall, with delicate bones and a skull that seemed shockingly small compared to modern humans. Her brain was no larger than that of a chimpanzee. Yet the tools scattered around her sharp-edged stone blades, fire, traces, hunting evidence, told a very different story. At first, no one could believe it. How could such a small-brained creature make tools sophisticated enough to butcher animals? The scientists double-checked, then triple-checked. And slowly, the realization sank in. This wasn't a child, nor a diseased modern human. It was a completely new species of human that had lived on Flores tens of thousands of years ago. That single discovery, deep within a shadowy cave, set off one of the greatest scientific debates of the 21st century. The announcement of Homo floresiensis in 2004 sent shockwaves through the scientific world. For decades, the story of human evolution had followed a relatively neat path, from early ape-like ancestors to Homo erectus, and eventually to us, Homo sapiens. But here was a species that didn't fit anywhere. Small-bodied, small-brained, yet clearly capable of advanced behaviors. How could that be possible? Some scientists flat out refused to believe it. They argued that the bones weren't from a new species at all, but from modern humans with medical conditions like microcephaly, which can shrink brain size, or dwarfism, which limits growth. To them, the idea of a Hobbit human seemed more like fantasy than science. The debate grew heated. Papers were published and challenged, conferences erupted into arguments, and even the media picked sides. Were these hobbits simply deformed humans, or a truly separate species that walked the earth alongside us? As more skeletons were unearthed in Liang Bua, however, the evidence piled up. The bones showed consistent features, unique wrist shapes, unusual feet, and proportions. Unlike any modern human, it became harder to dismiss them as mere abnormalities. Slowly, the tide began to turn. What had started as a shocking anomaly was now becoming undeniable. Homo floresiensis was real, and its existence meant our family tree was far stranger than we had ever imagined. Once the dust of debate began to settle, a startling truth emerged. The story of humanity wasn't a straight ladder of progress, but a tangled web filled with surprises. Homo floresiensis proved that small brains didn't necessarily mean simple minds. Despite having a brain only about a third the size of ours, they crafted stone tools, hunted animals, and may have even used fire. This revelation forced scientists to rethink what it really means to be human. For so long, intelligence had been measured by brain size and technological complexity. But here was a species that defied those rules. How could such tiny humans survive for thousands of years, right up until about 50,000 years ago, overlapping with modern humans who were beginning to spread across the globe? Even more astonishing, their existence hinted at a forgotten diversity in our evolutionary past. We once shared the planet, not just with Neanderthals or Denisovans, but with yet another branch of humanity, one that thrived in isolation on a remote island. The discovery of Homo floresiensis was more than just a scientific curiosity. It was a reminder that our past is richer, stranger, and far less predictable than we ever imagined. And as we move deeper into their world, one question lingers: how did these little humans survive in the land of giants? To understand the world of Homo floresiensis, we need to picture the island of Flores as it was tens of thousands of years ago, a place that seemed almost like a fantasy kingdom of giants and dwarfs. Evolution on islands often takes bizarre turns, and Flores was no exception. Here, massive storks stood taller than any human, flapping their enormous wings above the forests. Komodo dragons, still found today, prowled the undergrowth as apex predators, their venomous bites capable of bringing down prey many times their size. Even more curious, the island hosted pygmy elephants, known as stegodon, shrunken cousins of mammoths, no larger than a water buffalo. This strange mix of creatures existed because islands act as evolutionary laboratories. With limited resources, large animals tend to shrink over generations, while smaller ones can grow much larger without predators to keep them in check. Flores became a stage for what scientists call island dwarfism and island gigantism, forces that shaped not just animals but possibly humans too. Into this wild ecosystem stepped the tiny hobbits. Barely over a meter tall, they were surrounded by dangers on every side. And yet, against all odds, they carved out a life here. Their small stature may not have been a weakness, it might have been their greatest survival advantage. For a species so small, Homo floresiensis left behind evidence of surprising skill. Scattered throughout Liang Bua cave were finely crafted stone tools, sharp flakes, points, and cutting edges that rivaled those made by much larger-brained humans. These weren't crude rocks smashed together by chance. They were deliberately shaped with precision, designed to cut meat, scrape hides, and carve wood, but tools alone don't tell the whole story. The hobbits lived on an island teeming with prey, everything from small animals to the dwarf stegodon. Evidence suggests they may have coordinated hunts, driving these little elephants into traps or ambushes. Imagine creatures barely over 3 feet tall working together to bring down a lumbering elephant the size of a cow. It sounds impossible, yet the cut marks on fossilized stegodon bones hint that they succeeded. Fire, too, may have been part of their toolkit. Some archaeologists believe charred remains in the cave suggest controlled burning, though this is still debated. If true, it means these tiny humans had mastered one of the most powerful survival tools of all. In the end, their stone tools reveal a striking paradox. With brains no bigger than a chimp's, they behaved like skilled hunters, clever enough to thrive in a harsh and unpredictable world. Life on Flores was never easy for the hobbits. Every day meant balancing risk and resourcefulness. Komodo dragons lurked in the forests, capable of ambushing even the most cautious human. Giant storks might have preyed on their young. Volcanic eruptions occasionally reshaped the landscape, while periods of drought or heavy rainfall could wipe out food supplies. And yet, Homo floresiensis endured. Their small bodies may have worked in their favor, requiring fewer calories than larger humans and allowing them to thrive on limited island resources. They were also remarkably adaptable, able to make do with what the land offered, whether that meant hunting dwarf elephants or foraging for tubers and wild fruits. Survival likely depended on cooperation. A lone hobbit would stand little chance against a Komodo dragon, but a small group armed with stone tools and fire could drive it away. In this way, their strength wasn't in size or power, it was in community, strategy, and persistence. When we picture these little humans huddled together at night, perhaps keeping watch by flickering firelight while predators circled in the shadows, it's hard not to admire their resilience. They weren't the giants of prehistory, but in the ways that mattered most, they stood tall. For all their resilience, Homo floresiensis eventually vanished from Flores, and the mystery of their disappearance remains one of the most debated puzzles in archaeology. The most widely accepted timeline suggests they survived until about 50,000 years ago. But why did they disappear after thriving for so long? One theory points to the island's volatile environment. Flores sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire, a region of intense volcanic activity. Massive eruptions could have devastated the Hobbits' food sources, poisoned the air, and made survival nearly impossible. Ash layers in Liang Bua hint at such catastrophic events. Another possibility is climate change. Shifts in rainfall and vegetation may have disrupted the delicate balance of resources that kept the Hobbits alive. On a small island, even minor, environmental changes could prove devastating. But perhaps the most compelling theory involves us Homo sapiens. Around the same time the Hobbits disappeared, modern humans were spreading into Southeast Asia. Did we outcompete them for resources? Did our ancestors hunt them, either directly or by accident, while targeting the same prey? Or perhaps, like Neanderthals, they simply couldn't withstand the pressure of sharing the world with a species as adaptable and dominant as us. Whatever the reason, the last chapter of the Hobbit story ended abruptly and mysteriously. While science tells us that Homo floresiensis vanished around 50,000 years ago, the people of Flores carry a very different story, one whispered through legends of the Ebu Gogo. According to local folklore, the Ebu Gogo were small hairy people who lived in caves and shadowy forests. They were said to mimic human speech, though in a strange, mumbling way. Villagers described them as greedy and mischievous, often stealing food, sneaking into gardens, and even kidnapping children. Yet, they were also seen as clever survivors, capable of cooking food and using tools. What makes these tales so intriguing is their uncanny resemblance to the archaeological findings. Could the legends be a distant cultural memory of encounters between humans and the last Hobbits of Flores? Or are they simply myths born from imagination and fear of the unknown? Some reports suggest that sightings of small, elusive figures persisted into the last few centuries. Even today, a handful of locals insist that little people still wander the dense jungles, just beyond the reach of modern civilization. While science remains cautious, these stories keep the mystery alive. Perhaps the Hobbits never truly disappeared. Perhaps they still linger in memory, myth, or even reality. Whether or not the Hobbits linger in legend, their scientific story leaves us with profound lessons. Homo floresiensis shows us that being human isn't about size, strength, or even brain volume. It's about adaptability, creativity, and resilience. These little people survived in one of the most challenging environments on Earth, surrounded by predators and geological chaos, for tens of thousands of years. Their discovery also reminds us that our family tree is not simple. For much of history, we weren't alone. We shared the planet with Neanderthals, Denisovans, and now we know Hobbits too. Each of these species carved out a way of life, proving there are many paths to survival, not just ours. Perhaps the most humbling thought is this: we once lived in a world filled with other kinds of humans, each unique, each adapted to their own environments. Today, only Homo sapiens remains. But the Hobbits stand as a testament to the diversity of our lineage, and a reminder that intelligence takes many forms. In the end, Homo floresiensis challenges us to rethink what it means to be human. They may have been small in stature, but in their endurance, ingenuity, and mystery, they left behind a giant mark on our shared story. The tale of Homo floresiensis is more than just the story of a small human species on a distant island. It's a reminder that the past is far stranger and far richer than we once believed. When those tiny skeletons were first uncovered in Liang Bua cave, they shattered the idea that human evolution was a straight climb toward bigger brains and taller bodies. Instead, they revealed a different truth. Survival takes many shapes. Think about it. On an island dominated by giant storks, venomous lizards, and dwarf elephants, these hobbits not only endured, but thrived. They crafted tools, hunted, adapted to fire and famine, and held their ground for thousands of years. In a world that should have crushed them, they proved that resilience doesn't depend on size. It depends on spirit, on cooperation, on finding a way when the odds are stacked against you. And maybe that's why their story resonates so deeply with us today. Because in their struggle, we see a reflection of our ability to survive, adapt, and rise above challenges no matter how impossible they may seem. So the next time you hear the word giant, remember the hobbits of Flores. Small in body, yes, but in courage and endurance. They were larger than life. If you enjoyed this journey into the forgotten corners of human history, make sure to subscribe for more stories that reveal just how strange and extraordinary our past really was. And tell me in the comments, do you think the hobbits are truly gone? Or could their descendants still be out there, hidden in the shadows of Flores?